See? Hey, listen, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm having fun right now because me and you and Louise, we are now on the stream show, Ecamm Live's YouTube channel, and I see Tech Troublemaker hanging out with us. Hey guys, you know, let's do this. I have a couple of things going here, so let me figure it out. I know I have one of my videos going. Let me see if it's this. So let me figure it out. I know I have. Give me 1 second, Louise. I need to turn something off because I'm hearing myself double time.
Yeah, make sure it's not that window that you just opened.
I need to turn something off because I'm hearing myself double time.
Hey, Aubrey. Make sure it's not that window that you just opened. Hey, Aubrey. Make sure it's not that window that you just.
All right.
Did you get it?
That may be it.
Okay,
No.
I think so.
So,
No?
you know, I actually share monitors here in the studio
Did you get it?
with one of my computers. So, and I actually share monitors here. Just 1 second here.
Take your time, bro.
And I didn't turn that computer off. I don't know. I guess it was just waiting, just like everybody else, for the show to come on. I didn't turn that computer off. I don't know. I guess it was just waiting, just like everybody else, for the show to come on. That's really cool. That's really cool. I think I may have got it. Like everybody can hear it right now. Let me see here. I don't have anything else open. I may have got it. Like everybody can hear it right now.
I could still hear it because it's coming from your end.
Yeah,
It's almost
coming
like
from,
you have a TV in the background that's still playing it, and then your microphone picks it up again. I could still hear it.
No, so it is actual. My studio monitors are connected to this other thing here. Hold on 1 second.
Let's do it, bro.
Nah, I know how to handle this. Thing here. Hold on 1 second. That may work.
It sounds like it might have. I was waiting to see if we hear anything. Let's see if we get a thumbs up in the chat.
Yeah, I had to, yeah, multiple computers are really cool until you forget. So basically, I'm using the monitor, so I don't have a monitor on that computer because I'm using the monitor, and I must have had YouTube up, and it was waiting on the show. So when the show flipped on, you know, all the audio started to come through, and I can't see it, so I had to kind of, you know, go and turn it off. But I made it work.
Yeah, but we got the thumbs up in the chat, so we're good to go. Ready to rock and roll.
Yeah. I love this. Aubrey, hey, we got the principal here as well. She said her 2 favorites tonight. That's awesome. Thank you for being so nice. I'm excited to hear all about the cameras. Let me tell you something. Louise, I want to say this. We always tell people, like especially in the beginning, hey, what about the cameras? We say, hold on. The first thing you need to work on is your audio. Okay, people go work on their audio. Okay, well, what about the cameras? Well, the next thing you need to work on is your lighting. When do you have a chance to talk about cameras? There's got to be a time because right now there's so many cameras on the market for streamers. When should we talk about it? And I thought today would be a good day. Definitely happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. And there is no other person that I know that I want to have this conversation with other than Mr. Camera Junkie himself, because we can go on and on about cameras and what's out in the market, what's happening in the market, and what camera may be best. We both, guys, I will say this, at the end of the show, we both have our recommendations. We do. We do. Mr. Camera
Hmm.
Junkie will definitely tell you what his recommendation is for cameras. And of course, it's all based on how you use it. So I want to set the scene right. And before I go any further or get into the show, thank you for coming, sir, Mr. Camera Junkie. Thank you for hanging out with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. This is the second time I've had the pleasure to come onto the stream show, and last time it was so much fun. We spent a good amount of time speaking after we finished the broadcast, and now I'm just happy to share and have a good time, have a great conversation.
And we had a chance to kind of hang out in Albany, New York, for people of
Oh yeah,
video not yeah, it was last year. Yeah, it was last
yeah,
year. And man, it was a pleasure to meet you like in person,
yes.
and to meet Aiden in person. You know, all of that was really really cool. And your wisdom, the wisdom that you provide us, I really do appreciate you being. Um, Able to share that with people. I mean, you're not called Mr. Camera Junkie for nothing. I personally had several sessions. You remember when we were all on Clubhouse and
Hmm.
listening to each other, and you had so much wisdom to share. And I'm like, I gotta continue to have this guy on the show in rotation so he can kind of help us through the latest in tech, including cameras. So for everybody that's out there, tech troublemaker that's out there, the honest, they're saying hello to all of us. Yeah, people of video feels like forever ago. It really does. So I hope you
Yeah.
guys have already gotten started, or at least sent your information over to the marketing team about coming to Creator Camp. Like this is gonna be really cool in October. So hopefully you guys can come be a part of that.
Are you
Uh,
gonna be there?
Yes, yes, I'm going to be
Oh,
there.
then that's amazing because
I'm going
I'm
to be
gonna be
there.
there
There you
and I'm
go.
excited to see and meet and be able to like, share with so many amazing creators. So it's gonna be a lot of fun.
It's
But you talking about, you know, people of video being feels like forever ago, you mentioning Clubhouse and those conversations, that feels like forever
forever
ago
ago.
because
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that almost felt nostalgic.
I mean, we were on every day. You know, at some point or
Yeah.
another, I really asked a question about Clubhouse. I said, now, if some of the largest content creators in our space are spending time on Clubhouse, like there's got to be something about this. And really what it was the new latest and greatest thing, and it's still there, and people are still using it to connect and have community. We're just not using it.
Well, it just depends on where you want to put kind of which basket you want to put your eggs in,
Right.
right? For a better way of saying it. Because even though I was having a lot of fun and making a lot of connections on Clubhouse, I had to recognize that that wasn't the platform as a camera junkie that I wanted to like excel at because there was no cameras in Clubhouse. And I'm a
Right.
camera junkie. So it kind of, even though I was still able to share information through the conversation, I wanted to maximize in the platform that I preferred, which was YouTube. So I said, I can't dedicate my time to those conversations in Clubhouse. And now I need to practice what I'm preaching and start putting my own work in the place where I want to excel.
Gotcha. That makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, and that's another reason why you're here, because you have so much wisdom to give all of us. So let's jump into it today, guys. I tell you what we're gonna do. Louise and I are gonna talk for a little bit about cameras. I know you guys are gonna have comments. You're gonna have questions. Please put a Q colon in front of your question, and we'll get to them in after we do this first presentation, and hopefully we'll help you. Now, the name of this show today is the Ultimate Guide. Okay, I'm gonna see what I said. Ultimate Camera
Ultimate
Guide.
camera guy. We
Yeah, I
will
had
do
to
our
look
best.
at my thumbnail to be, oh, what did I title this thing? The Ultimate Camera Guide. So we're gonna help you figure out how to choose the best camera for you. All right. And then through all of that, we're going to talk about the latest and greatest cameras. And just, I'm going to turn the mic over to Louise and he can just go and do his thing. So give us 1 second here. Here we go. Let's get started.
Yeah.
So the first thing I want to talk about is for everybody that is using this system. Let me pull this over here. Give me 1 second. Like thing reset on me, but I think I got it. My stream deck is here now. There we go. So the first thing we want to talk about, Louise, is we want to set the stage for all of our e-cameras. So if you're watching this today on the Ecamm, in whether it's live or in replay, this the camera guide is for people that is using Ecamm in their home studios. Okay. And the reason why I want to do that is because, Louise, I just think that's the mass of people that we may be missing. And a lot of times when I've heard people do guides or help people choose cameras, they're talking about vlogging, they're talking about photography. And if we're in our home studios, we're just using it for streaming. Does that make sense just to kind of corner it down for streamers?
Yeah, we're always talking about niching down into a category. And I'm thinking that you can't get a little bit more niche than this, right? We're talking
Right.
about a specific use case for e-cameras who have a home studio. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't have other things, but right now in today's topic of choice is going to be what are the best cameras to use for an in-home studio using eCam.
There you go. There you go. So the next thing we're going to talk about is your studio size. So you want to take in mind how big your studio is. All right. So if it's a tiny space you have, or if it's a large space, the reason why that's a big deal in my mind, Louise, is that it kind of helps you not just your camera, but maybe the lens that you get or that you can get. If you have more space that you can push the camera out, you can possibly get a different type lens. Is that right?
Yeah, not possibly, but you would need, it would be necessary for you to adjust the lens. Because even though you have a wide angle shot, if you have a big space and you decide to put a lot of space in between you and the camera, you're going to look microscopic, right? And you're going to
Right.
look very small, and you're not going to have the presence that I think you're going to want out of your image. At the same time, if you do have a lot of space, then it allows you to play with, like zoom lenses, which might give you a more pleasing shot, right? Because some
Right.
people don't like the compression that you get from wide angle lenses, and that all has to do with your own preference and the size of your studio. Like, for example, I don't have any space behind my camera.
Got
So
you.
directly behind it, I have a wall, and that's my limitation. So what I do is that I make sure that I put the most space behind me so that I can have a nice backdrop. But that's just me, right? Some people would take the same exact space and then put themselves closer to the back wall so that they can use a similar type lens, like something with more of a zoom focal range, so that they can crop into that even though they're across the room. And then some people just like having it, close quarters, or might not have the space to utilize and are dealing with like a corner of a room,
Right.
that's where they're creating their production. So the space and the limitations really determines on what camera or lens that you'll be able to utilize or would want to.
So I have a mindset of having your camera as close to you as you can to get the best picture. Am I right in saying that?
Not necessarily, because it really depends on the picture that you want. So,
Right.
for example, right here, for me to get the image that I want, I'm using a wide angle lens equivalent to 24 millimeters.
Right.
But there are things that are even wider, which will give me like a 16 millimeter range of view. That to fit more of the width of the image into the same kind of camera, you're going to be squeezing things in. And when you squeeze the outside in, that will then tend to squeeze my face in as well. And then it will elongate it, and anything that's closest to the lens will actually seem larger than what it is. So
Got you.
a really wide angle lens close up to you is going to give you an enlarged nose and
Right.
very thin facial profile, which is not
It's
pleasing
not
to
pleasing.
the viewer or to the person who's actually recording themselves. That's why fish eye lenses are not recommended or preferred when it comes to this.
Right.
But in that same aspect, you give yourself a little bit of space in between so that you can get a more natural or realistic image of yourself to be portrayed through, your broadcast or recordings, and that will obviously give you a much better image, not going as wide as possible.
Got you. So one of the things that we have that's a limitation for us as Ecamm home studio streamers and content creators, because you could be building tutorials, all of that kind of stuff using Ecamm, is that we do have our monitors in front of us, and we have, our lights, and the lights could be pushed back. You can get bigger, more stronger lights and push them back a little bit. But we have so many things in front of us. I mean, the camera kind of has to fit in the middle of all of that. So you can't push back but so far, because then it will pick up your monitors and everything. That's what
Well,
I'm thinking about when I'm saying having that camera close, so it didn't pick up all of the stuff that you have in front of you.
well, that has to do with the lens because at that moment, when you have the camera pushed away from you, that's when you would have to adjust the lens because I wouldn't recommend a 24 millimeter wide that would bring all of that. But in the same space, so to give you kind of like an idea, right? The same little space that you have, say, between a couple of computer monitors where your camera sits at that moment, that's the viewpoint. If you have the ability to move the camera back, that's when you would go from a 24 millimeter to maybe like a 50 millimeter
Gotcha.
lens because you're going to compress the image, and what you're going to do is that you're going to tell the camera, do not look at the monitors on the side. I want you to focus through the little gap in between them
Uh huh.
and then just pull
That's the
out the
picture.
image of the person in between. And because that compression of a 50 millimeter is more pleasing to, general face structure, is why some people prefer having a bit of a telephoto lens with their imagery. That's when cameramen and stuff like that come into play because you'd be using that to get the reach, but that is literally having a person record you. And in this use case scenario, you would still have to think that way, even though it would be represented by a tripod.
I get it. I get it. That makes a lot of sense. And I hope we're helping you. Again, if you got any questions, you have any questions about all of this, Q Colon, and I'll go through the questions. And of course, Mr. Camera Junkie is here to help us through it all. I really like this. So the next thing I want to talk about is making sure that you future proof yourself. Thinking about getting a camera. Um, I have a issue because I do like things. I have the nostalgia. I like going back and using old equipment. I think, DSLRs are really cool cameras. And if you can go get a camera that was $6,000, 10 years ago and use it now with the latest, I mean, you could probably get it for $500 or $1,000 and you feel like you really have something, but it may not have all the technology in it, doesn't have the latest and greatest processor, and you miss out on some new technology, but you do have a camera that was a big deal, but that was years ago. So I think you have to be mindful because, Louise, it would get me. I would look at some of those old cameras I couldn't get that was a big deal, and you would
Mhm.
miss out on, a smaller, cheaper camera that is more conducive to where we are today and the future, and it costs probably about the same amount of money
Or a lot less
or a lot
because
less.
on the used market, like I see them all the time and I get all those nostalgic feels, but at least I know that that's what I'm getting into. So to be clear, if I'm looking at an older camera, my camera junkie crew, they know me for always analogizing with car culture. because
Okay.
I'm also a car guy. And it's like, to me, like buying a classic car that you couldn't afford when it came out, but now it's, within the price range, and you're like, I can get it for pennies on the dollar. So if somebody were to tell you, like, hey, you can get a 1985 Lamborghini Countach for pennies on the dollar on the used market, you'd be like, yeah, I know it doesn't have anti-lock brakes, it doesn't have airbags, it doesn't have any of those creature comforts that we deal with today, but I still want that car for the nostalgia. Like, I'm going to get it for that price. Now, if you have that mindset, go for it, right? But when we're talking about the studio,
Come on.
it's
Yeah.
kind of like you said, you want to future proof yourself.
You want
At this moment, you wouldn't want to hinder yourself or cut your legs out from under you because you want to get the latest and greatest of an older generation to use it with today's latest tech. And
right.
that's where I wouldn't recommend that, because there's a lot of options available now that are going to get you up to date and for years down the road for the same price that you can get that old Countach.
And that being said, I think your analogy fits perfectly for what we're saying today, because you can get that older car that you never could afford, that was your dream car way back. But that dream car would never be your everyday car. It's
Exactly. It's
your
not going to be
weekend
your
car.
everyday
It's
driver.
not go. You're not gonna drive it every day. And what we're talking about is your workhorse streaming tutorials, setup camera in your studio. This is your workhorse camera. Now, you're not doing the cell phone. You're stepping up from the cell phone. You're stepping up from the webcam. And now you have the cam. Like, this is future proofing yourself, the camera of your choice. We'll finally get a chance to talk about it. That's where we are today. So you're future proofing yourself. And the next thing is, we all have preferences, okay? And all the cameras out there, this is a guide. So the guide now is saying, think about color, the color that you would get from whatever camera you're trying to get. So all of them have different, what we call cameras, color science. And you may have a preference of a Canon color or a Sony color or a Fuji color or a Lumix color. And you just want to be mindful of, when you're buying that camera, what color am I getting? Does that color resonate with me, as another part of the guide? Would you agree with that as well?
Yeah, I guess the part that I would add to this, and I guess to sprinkle over all of the subjects that we've been talking about, is that you're going to need to do a bit of research yourself before you pull the trigger.
Right.
So, for the color example, we're on this amazing platform called YouTube. If you're on here, I would highly recommend for you to look up the camera that you're thinking about purchasing and seeing if somebody even has just a demonstration of what the camera looks like in an actual use case scenario, so that you can have an idea to say, you know what, I really liked the Canon colors over Sony's straight out of the box. And
Right.
that could be the position that you're in right now, that you want to step up, in your camera game, but at the same time you don't have all of the knowledge of doing everything in manual mode, or basically going into log footage to start color grading. So you want the easiest color science, right? That we're talking about out of the box. And that's when I would tell you, look into the devices, take a look at a couple of videos at a camera that you're interested in, and see if the final product that you're seeing is what you want to get out of your production.
Yes, and I have another recommendation towards the end. When we look at the particular cameras, like when we start talking about cameras, I have something. Well, let me just go ahead and say it now, because Louise has already talked about it. Do your research on YouTube, but also, before you purchase a camera, my recommendation is that you rent it. All right, you
Oh,
save a
that's a
lot
great
of money
recommendation.
by
Yes.
just renting the camera, putting it in your hand. And to be honest with you, it's really cheap to rent cameras. I didn't know how cheap it was, but it's really cheap. You can get, any camera that you want, rent it for, 7 days. They'll ship it in, you ship it back. It's no big deal, but you have an opportunity to see that camera, feel the camera, and then even if it is renting two at a time, say these are the two I want to get both of them, and kind of go through the paces and decide on the one you want based off of that time you've had with it. And, it's really not that expensive. All
Oh,
right.
that's a great recommendation.
That's cool. So please write that down in your notes. So the next one is autofocus. Now, Mr. Camera Junkie, autofocus is a big thing in what we're doing. Well, how would I preference this? Because sometimes I'm in autofocus and sometimes I'm in manual focus here live based on where I am. I'm not moving that much. Um, and I'm able to get where I need to be, but some of the technology that Sony has come up with the face detect. I mean, it's really cool. Like you're gonna be in focus most of the time. Am I right?
Yeah. And that's kind of what you need as a solo creator using Ecamm, right? You're trying to eliminate, failure points as much as possible. And even though you're upgrading in tech, you don't want to add another failure point having a camera with bad autofocus. Now, previously, until the most recent releases, I could have told you pretty much all cameras have good autofocus except Panasonic, but they've actually came out, swinging in their
They
last
did.
couple of cameras, and now they're more than adequate for the camera. So once again, it's like to do your research. If you like a color, make sure that you're getting, and you're future proofing yourself and getting the latest like available camera that's going to have more than adequate enough autofocus so that that no longer becomes a pain point, because nothing is worse than you set up the lights, you have your setup, you set up the camera and you hit record, and you put all of your effort into that piece of content, and you feel like, oh, that's a grand slam, like like I nailed it out of the park. You press the button, you finish recording, and then when you go to check the file, it's completely out of
Out
focus,
of focus. That's
and
happened to
it's
me,
just
brother.
and it's blurry. And then at that moment you're like, oh, I'm not even I don't not only is it like so demotivating, right, but you
Right.
don't even have the energy
To
to
do it
repeat it
again.
at that same
Yeah.
level, right?
Yeah.
And because
Yeah.
of that, like, disheartening fact that it was blurry and you're doing it all over again, you don't have like that same level of enthusiasm. So that's something that I try to make sure that is always there with the content that I create, that it's like genuine and authentic, so that you can like feel the energy, because you do. And for us in the know, right? They say the television or the video zaps like 10% or 15% of your energy. That's why you need to kind of like bring some more, because if not, you sound kind of Ben Stein and very mundane. But if you're re-recording something that you've lost because of a blurry, like file, it makes it even that much harder for you
Harder.
to bring that energy the second time.
Yeah, I've learned to just take a break and walk away from it and then come back. Like, let me try to do
That's a
this
good
again.
thing.
And think in my head, that was just a rehearsal. Now I got to do it again and do it the right way. So I definitely get it. So the next thing I want everybody to think about is cost. Like, that's a big deal. Whatever your budget is, like figuring out what your budget is, because there's some, Sony has got some real deal
Yes.
cameras out that's going after content creators and people that have home studios like us. And, we, Louise, we talked about it. And, you know, you had some comments that make me think about if I wanted a full frame camera here in the studio. Like, now I could afford it. It's kind of like what is it that you can afford? Like, a lot of times people get, let's go back to the car analogy. They say, well, I can
Okay.
afford the BMW, but can you afford the maintenance? You know what I'm saying? That's the
You
big
got it.
deal. Can you
Yes,
afford the maintenance of
the
that
oil
car?
change.
Right. So, you can maybe you can afford these cameras, but can you afford the camera and the lens? Right? Because,
Yep.
that the lenses on full frame cameras cost a little more,
Yeah,
a
significantly more. And
little
that's
harder to
the other
come
thing,
by.
because yeah, we were having this conversation just the other day, but I see here Rainy Cajun in the chat. So Jeremy, we actually had a conversation via email because he was in this same thought as well with the new release of the Sony ZV-E1, which this is a little small compact, powerhouse of a camera,
Hmm.
full frame, and it's at $2,200. And he in particular, Jeremy, was very interested in it, and he's
Right.
like, I'm thinking about this camera, and I kind of was able to talk him off the ledge because it has to do with the cost, right? The budget of what you're trying to do and what you have for your, Ecamm studio in home is really the main thing. And my recommendation is to reverse engineer your needs or maybe even your wants, and then start looking and researching on what camera can fill those needs. Because even though it is a full frame camera, it sells for like $2,200, $2,300. The lens is not included, and because you're using a full frame lens, you're gonna need that to cover the sensor.
Right.
So one thing that you're gonna want to avoid is that Sony in particular has their one mount system, meaning that the full frame lenses fit on APS-C cameras and vice versa. So
Okay.
there's no reason for you to buy a full frame camera and then be subjected to putting a APS-C lens
Lens on it because you're
on
just
that
cutting it
camera.
down anyway.
Exactly. You're basically cutting it down, and you're no longer using the fullness of the full frame sensor, and the image quality is no different than you would get from APS-C. So instead of spending the money there and then being required to spend another 18 to $1,300 on a lens, you can get very similar results with the CVE10, which is the APS-C, and a Sigma 16 millimeter, which is about $400. And right there, in a nutshell, at $1,100, you got camera and lens for exactly half of just the price of the body of this new ZVE1.
Wow. Wow. So I said, when we talked, we actually had this same talk as we were kind of doing our research or, kind of getting together on this show. And for anybody that's out there, let me get to this screen because, it could be Canon, it could be Sony, it could be Fuji, I said Fuji, Fuji,
That's
or
good. He should look for a brand sponsorship there, but
I
that's a whole
know it,
different
right?
conversation.
I know it, right? Or the Lumix. As far as these cameras, like these are some of the leading cameras. I think, you could throw the Nikon in there as well.
Mhm.
As far as cameras that can actually do what we need done in our studio. Um, for somebody that's in a studio setting using Ecamm, I want to say this. If you want to go full frame, you have the budget to do whatever. Okay. So if you want to spend, you know, 4 to 5 grand on your camera and lens for you in your studio, you have the budget for it. Listen, there's some cameras out there that I think that was that ZVE1. Did
Well,
I
yeah,
say it
but
right?
if we're talking about no budget, right? You're
Right.
talking Sony Alpha One. You're talking a $6,000 camera, or even going into the cinema line. So get an FX6 for like $7,000 and put a lens on there, and you're gonna really be increasing the quality of your production. But you also have to know that that's what you're getting yourself into.
Right. And you also have to know that there are people that are using cell phones that may be resonating with their audience a little better than you after you spent 10 grand on a camera?
Well, look, we can get into a whole different conversation there, right? Because we're not here to say what can or can't be done, because there's amazing content creators out there that really resonate with their audience, and they're still using webcams. And Doc mentions to them, like, please get a better camera. And they're just like, hey, this is what works for them, and their audience is there for it no matter what.
Exactly.
That's the, like, outlier, right? Like, you can't worry about that. We're talking about someone who's wanting to take that production to the next level, and not worrying about what anyone else is doing. Because going back to the car analogy, right? The guy who's out to buy, the Aston Martin, right? The person who's going to go out to buy the Lamborghini, they're not worried about who's driving a Toyota or who's driving a Honda.
Right.
They're out there to get what they want. And if you're in that position, hey, more power to you, right? I wish that for all of us. But we're just talking, like, to keep it within the reins of exactly what your production and what you want to get out of it is. And that's why I say my number one recommendation is to reverse engineer what it is that you want. Because there's people who first find out that I produce podcasts, and then they have all these questions, because right now that's one of the hot topics, that everybody wants to create a podcast. And then they're like, I want 3 cameras with 2 guests and this and that. And when you give them the budget of just basic 3 camera setup, it's way above what they're willing to spend. So that's where I would put it on the person who's creating the studio or wanting to do this, right?
Right.
I go back to, how do you want to represent yourself online? Because if we go back 20 years, right, from today's date, people wouldn't hesitate to spend $2 or $3,000 on a business suit just so that they can look good for an interview, right?
Right. Right.
But now we communicate through this digital space, and our setups have become our digital business suits, and sort of say. So when I come on and show up to a Zoom meeting, show up to basically any conversation that requires my presence online, because I'm always putting my best foot forward with the quality of setup that I have going on right now, it doesn't matter if I'm wearing a t-shirt. People are coming in and be like, yo, why do you look Blu-ray? Right? Like, why do you look like so high definition? And, we're over here on phones and webcams, and that makes such a huge difference. So
It does.
that's the way that I see it. Like, right now, or 20 years ago, it wouldn't be a problem to invest in your, physical appearance for a job interview on one day, but yet it makes it really hard for them to spend that same amount of money on their setup that they're going to be using multiple times a month to represent themselves the best way on this new online platforms.
Man, you said it? You said a mouthful there, and it's also important. I think about it all the time, and I get calls a lot. And one of the reasons why I get calls, or what they say, is that you have a great setup. Like, you look good online. How can you help me do what you're doing? And
And this is exactly, because once you start doing what you like, you're not worried about the content creators who are doing it with iPhones or anything else. But then you will be reached out by the people who want to have what you have.
the look.
And maybe for them, the budget is not an option.
Right. And then you're able to say, "Hey guys, if it was me, I would do this, this, and this. Let me see your space. How much?" And I'll go through the guide, okay, that we just did. Your location, what kind of colors do you like? All those things to kind of help folks to understand. Like, this is what my recommendation would be for you. Now, we both have recommendations, but before we do that, we have a couple people that have some questions here. So let me go to the questions really quick. So one of them is,
Absolutely.
I primarily use a webcam. What is the benefit or need to connect a cam link to my Canon 33
35
millimeter,
millimeter.
35? Okay.
Well, that's exactly what I was saying. Like the imagery that you're going to get from a webcam is not going to compare to the image that you're going to get from a full-fledged camera. We were having this conversation while we were setting up for this show, and I mentioned to you that not all resolutions are created equal,
Okay.
right? Because I have a webcam here, basic generic, like an Amazon webcam, as you
Hmm.
can see here, and this to my computer is recognized as 1080p high definition. Yet I have this Sony camera right here, the ZV-1F, that
Uh-huh.
I can connect via USB-C to my computer, and it will then be recognized as a webcam, and it maxes out at 720p,
Okay.
less than the Amazon webcam, and yet the image quality is night and day. Like this is what I like to call hot garbage. And this is something that is very usable that, for example, I demonstrated it on my live stream last night where I did my entire live stream using the 720p resolution from the ZV-1F.
So, one thing that people need to understand with their phones, webcams, point and shoot cameras, you want to think about the sensor size on those products. Okay, so when we talk about APS-C, when we talk about full frame, these sensor sizes, and I should have a picture of that, and I don't, but they're a little larger sensors. They're much larger sensors, so they're able to take on more light. So I will always tell. That's why we tell people audio first. Get your audio straight because people are not going to listen to something that's choppy. They're not going to listen to you no matter how good you look. And then lights is second because if you're using a cheaper camera or a webcam, if you throw more light on it, you can get the best out of that picture because the sensors are so small. Now, as you're going to the next thing, you get a larger sensor, you have the lights already, you can get a great picture out of your next camera. And that's what we're talking about today. So, the benefits or needs to connect a cam link to my Canon 35 millimeter, is that even possible? That's a film camera, right?
Well, I just took it as like the general realm, like connecting a DSLR, because even though
Right.
a DSLR is digital, it was still considered to be a full frame 35 millimeter size. So whenever we talk about mirrorless cameras and we say full frame, it's still referencing that 35 millimeter
I get it,
size. So
Rance. I get it.
not getting into all the specifics of saying exactly which camera do you have, or does it even have the capability of sending an HDMI signal out, just basically saying a Canon camera full frame, connecting it via HDMI through the cam link. Why is that a better image, even if it's older, because of the sensor size?
There
So,
you go.
also to touch a little bit more on that, there are different levels and grades of webcams, right? There's $250 and $400 webcams that have exactly the same thing, more glass in front of the sensor and a bigger sensor to capture more light to give you a better image. And that could be a possibility as well. But as always, I say, do your research and try to see what that image looks like beforehand. You gave that great recommendation that with these mirrorless cameras that you can rent them ahead of time.
Right.
I'm not sure that you could rent most webcams, and test them out. So in that case, if you can, once again, do your research, check out what these images would look like, and then make your decision upon that.
Sounds good. Let's go to Jamie here. I use a ZVE10 with the Sigma 16. Expected that a 23 or 30 millimeter has more natural face appearance. Comments. He's asking questions there. To overcome this, I use a Sony remote. Holy, here we go. Sony remote zoom. Any thoughts?
Okay, to kind of zoom in, well, that's good with the Sony ecosystem or the Sony camera systems, because Sony in particular has a feature in their cameras called clear image zoom. And it has to do that a lot of Sony cameras, even though they don't talk about it or put it in the box, are actually capturing more information than they're pumping out. So you would hear it being spoken about in a lot of previous releases that they're saying it's a 6K image downscaled to 4K.
Right.
That's because there's 6K worth of info that is being processed and then, giving you that output of just a 4K image file. So that's where exactly the question was again.
The question,
Like,
he's using the Sigma 16, but he suspects that the
oh, that, yeah,
23 and the
I
30.
lost the thread. I just lost the thread. I needed to get my range back. And that's why saying that Sony is really good, because that overscaled image allows you to zoom in without losing quality. A lot of other cameras tend to have a digital zoom, which is not as good as optical, obviously. But with the Sony system and the clear image zoom, you don't lose loss of quality, and it gives you a little bit more reach to reach that kind of like 30 mil 33 millimeter range
Hmm.
using the Sigma 16 millimeter lens.
Well, let me say this with this question here. I think he's right on it using the Sigma 16 with the E10, to ZV E10. Like, I don't know if the other was going to give him, he's looking for more of a natural face appearance. Like, that's the number one. That's,
Okay.
I guess I could say it now. That's a recommended camera for streamers. Like, I recommend that camera as
That's
well.
what I'm using right now.
Yeah,
I'm
I
using
recommend that
uh
camera.
I'm using the A6100, is same exact sensor, so we
Right.
could be getting the same quality and the same lens, the Sigma 16 millimeter. But to clarify, just in case, someone is hearing this for the first time, there's this thing called a crop factor multiplication that you have to apply. So even though I mentioned it, the Sigma 16 millimeter gives you a 24 millimeter look. That is what your outcome is. So if you're on APS-C and you wanted to get this type of image, you can get it using that 16 millimeter setup. But if you buy a full frame camera and you buy a 16 millimeter lens, you're not going to be getting anything close to this. It's going to be a lot wider and way more fisheye,
Right.
because you're getting the extent without that multiplication and the APS-C crop factor that gets added onto it. So the lens millimeter focal length that's written on the lens doesn't change, but when you're dealing with APS-C, the multiplication and the final product and the image that you're getting is there. So now, if, for example, you want something more close in, more zoomed in than what you're getting with the Sigma, and even adding the clear image zoom, then I would recommend looking at like the next step up. And a very inexpensive option is the Sigma 30 millimeter lens. So the Sigma 30 millimeter for the same APS-C has that 1.4 aperture. So you can get really good results in low light, but being 30 millimeters from the box, you still have to apply that multiplication factor of 1.5 with Sony, 1.6 with Canon cameras, and that multiplication is now going to take that lens and give you the equivalent of a 45 millimeter look, which
Gotcha.
might be something that you're looking to get, that is, like we talked about, more pleasing and better for the facial features, because it's leaning a lot closer to the 50 millimeter look that you would get from a full frame 35 millimeter 50 millimeter lens.
Hey, listen, you might have to replay that again to get it all, but he's giving you all the science behind this. My question is, if I'm going from a 16 to a 30, wouldn't I still have to push the camera back away a little bit to get this look? So if I'm on a 16 now and I
Yes,
go up
to
to a
keep the
30,
framing.
I'm gonna have to get the frame, I have to push the camera back. because
Yes, you're
otherwise it
gonna
would
have to
be
push the camera back or move yourself back from it, regardless. Like you just have to create that distance that's gonna be necessary.
gotcha. Because it could come and look like
You know what? Let me see if I can do it.
this,
I'm gonna.
and you just have to be careful. You have to be careful. Um, Good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. If this is helping you, if you're learning something today, please hit the like button. All right. I really will appreciate that. Let us know that we're helping you. So here's the next question. I have two Insta360 link. Does anyone on this stream know how Ecamm will see both cameras? The second Insta360 link is grayed out as a camera choice in Ecamm. So can we help him out with this? I have one that I think could work, but I'm not really sure because basically it's just like connecting two webcams. It's really hard for the computer to figure out which one is which.
Okay, now I'm gonna give you my thoughts on this, but take it with a grain of salt for the simple reason that I do not own the Insta360 cameras, and I've never messed with them, not even one, let alone two of them going into the same machine. But when it comes to cameras and them being recognized through Ecamm and through your Mac computer, the main thing that you have to pay attention to is the USB controllers. So a lot of these, like connections in the back are being controlled by a particular module that is basically kind of like your traffic controller, right? Of the information going in and out. And they could only control so much information. And if it's a camera feed, they might only be able to recognize one. So if you have like a dock or a hub type situation that you're taking one of your Thunderbolt ports from the back and trying to connect two cameras to it, it's almost like you're trying to push two cars through the same lane, right? Because you only have one controller and it doesn't able to recognize. So I'm not sure if this helps at all in this particular case, but whenever I've dealt with issues not being recognized, I make sure that they're on their own USB channel, so to speak, their own USB connection, and make sure that they're completely separate and not having any chance of overlap, so that they each have their own lane to communicate with Ecamm.
There you go. I hope that helps you. I hope that helps you. And if it doesn't help, you can always hit up people inside of the Ecamm support, and they'll be able to kind of help you with that as well.
But to give another tip, if he wants to find out a little bit more, I would highly recommend to check out the Ecamm Discord and put his question there, because you'll probably find another one of the Ecamm members in Discord that could have a similar setup to his using multiple cameras and could have already faced this issue and overcome it.
So I have Raining Cajun here who says the Sony ZVE1. He has that with the 30 millimeter 1.4 lens and it's beautiful. And I am completely jealous. I'm just being honest. I'm a little jealous because I'm sure that's a nice shot. I have to check you out to see what you're doing, and that may lead us into like our recommendations. So I know that Canon has a camera that they just released this year called the R10, and it's a
Mhm.
really really good camera for streaming. It may be like one of the ones that they're using. It is a APS-C camera as well. It's all in line, and I think everything that I would recommend. Well, no, I mean if somebody wants that, I mean we got it right here. That Sony ZVE1, that's a good camera, right?
Mhm.
That's the new one. That's the new full frame camera, right?
Yes.
Because I get the names mixed up with the what is it the E10, the first one that doesn't have the interchangeable
Okay.
lens.
Okay, so the first one that doesn't have interchangeable lens is a Sony ZV-1.
ZV1, which is a
Just the ZV-1.
to be honest with you, like that is the first step outside of a phone and webcam to me. So if you're stepping up from a webcam, like this could really be the next step up. The
And then they
ZV.
came out with the ZVE10, which is basically the APS-C version of that camera, but
For
interchangeable
lenses.
lenses so that you can have a variety of wide, mid to telephoto, getting that same type of quality, taking it away from just the vloggers, but more into content creation. Then they released the ZV-1F, which is the one that I have here, which the F stands for fixed focal length. And that one returns more like the original ZV-1,
Hmm.
but it doesn't have a zoom capability. So when you turn it on, like I'll show you right here, when you turn it on like the ZV-1, there's no lens that extracts.
Right.
So it's a fixed 20 millimeter lens, so it's a bit wider than the one that you would get with the ZV-1, but more into that category, which is a fixed frame, very compact, wide angle lens, and it only has that clear image zoom. And the latest release is the one that Jeremy has there, which is the ZV-E1, and the E1 is their full frame version of the Sony ZV-E10.
It's the full frame version
All
of
right,
the
let me see if I can break
ZVE10.
it down
No,
a
no, I
little
think
bit
I got
easier.
it. I think I got it.
No,
I didn't know that. I was, to be honest with you, um, to be honest with you, I was thinking more of that full frame cinema line camera,
no,
but
that's the
this
FX series.
FX series. So that
Yeah.
came out with the 30 on there, right?
The
The
FX 30 is
three,
the APS-C, and the 3 is the full frame version of it.
got you. But that's not what the
Mm-mm.
ZVE1 is. It is a full frame version of the E10.
This is a good visual recognizer of the ZV line of Sony cameras. It's gonna be this little fuzzy microphone topper. So you see the little microphone
Uh
here
huh.
on top, it's got a fuzzy top, and it has this 3 capsule microphone. That is basically the signature, I guess, visual aspect that you could always see that makes it a ZV camera. And that 3 capsule microphone is what came out in the ZV-1 and made it very popular for vloggers because you can get better quality audio without having to get another microphone or even wear a lavalier. With that, they said that it wasn't wide enough, and that's why Sony basically came out with the same exact camera with a fixed wide lens, and that's kind of like the replacement for the vloggers, which is the one that I have here. Now they came out with that same microphone body style with the 3 capsule with an interchangeable lens, and their first iteration was the ZVE10, and that one is their APS-C version. And now they just released like the bigger brother to that one, which is their full frame E mount camera in the same line with the same fuzzy top, 3 capsule microphone, and all the bells and whistles that they can fit in it.
Listen, I had to keep up, brother. I'm sitting here taking my notes because I guess I was off a little bit of what this new camera line was and could be used for, but I love it that they have um, so many options for creators now. You know,
Well,
we're in the
creators,
studio.
and that's just Sony brand. Like, we're not talking about Canon, and like you brought up their Lumix and Fuji and Nikon and all these different companies out there that are available to us. And when you have this competition between the brands, us, the content creators, we're the ones who win, because depending on
Right.
what your favorite or what you're leaning to, you kind of just have to like wait a little bit until your team catches up, with their version of the latest and greatest, and then you're right back up to par with what you want. And that goes back to that future proofing, right? Knowing what you want, reverse engineering, and then future proofing yourself to say, you know what, I want a minimum of 4K so that I'm kind of future proof for repurposing of this content in the future instead
Right.
of giving it the least quality, because we might be thinking about this in a small form right now to say like, yeah, right now it might be an inconvenience to go to 4K, but as we all aspire to be the best versions of ourselves, let's say that you get to achieve, and like all the successes that you want out of your life, and 20, 30 years from now they're going to do a recursor, or basically like the a living document of what you've been able to amass within your career, and they're gonna have to pull back videos from like your iPhone or for something very low quality, when you have the ability to record yourself in the highest quality. So when they make the movie of DJ Strick, they have 4K images to deal with. And even when we get there, we're still gonna look at 4K like we look at VHS tapes today.
Right, right. Because they're starting to develop or have out there 8K televisions. Like, it
Yeah,
may
the
not be
TVs
in
are out there.
homes. It may not be in many homes yet, but the technology is coming. You always want to be thinking about what's next. And we have a few people. Well, let me do this. My friend Erica is here hanging out with us today. Erica, I hope you didn't have to wait too long for your shout out, but thank you for coming through. And USA Stream says, is asking us a questions about lighting. What is the light we used to use to look great or somewhat great? So lighting, maybe Louise will come back and do a lighting show
That will
because
be fun.
yeah, that'll be fun. I want to stick with the cameras because there's so much time that we miss it on cameras. We just miss
Mhm.
it. Like we always tell people, the best camera to have is the best camera to use is the one you have. Well, what happens when I want to upgrade my camera? Hopefully, we gave you the ultimate guide to having the great camera that you want. And there's several people that are talking about the cameras they're using right now. Marine X, I use my Sony FX3 with a 35, which is a great camera, sir. You're probably looking good. I got to check you out as well. The camera is 4 foot from me, and the background is about 6 foot. He's got a lot of space. That's a lot of space
Oh yeah.
studio wise to be able to use a camera like that. So that's cool, man. We got to check you out. Here's some.
Absolutely. He's one of my camera junkie. He's one
That's
of
what's
the camera
up.
junkie crew, and he definitely has a really nice studio. He's got like his show that he does weekly, and big part of the community. Always appreciate him.
That's awesome, man. Love having people from the community come through. Sony EV ZVE10, Sony 15 millimeter 1.4. That already sounds good on his main camera. Then he has a second one, 1.8 for his overhead. Now that's a little overkill of the overhead, but hey, I'm sure he's getting great cameras. Might be overkill, but I love it, and you are right on it.
Look,
When you get to a place
this
where
is
you
not
love
the
it,
show for overkill. This is the show for overkill. Like
yes,
we're
definitely.
talking
We
about,
love it.
if budget's not an option, bro, I'll have like a red camera as my overhead so I can get that creamy full frame cinematic. You understand? With the long widescreen, just to show you, like me soldering a microphone or something. Like I would have it all.
That is funny. Rainy Cages says limitation is the budget. Okay, just be sure it is a budget. I spent too much just to have a basic studio. You are right. We all want more than basic studios. Enough. So if companies didn't send me stuff, I would not have been able to afford what I have. And some of the things I have in my studio is sent by companies, so I completely understand that as well. What else do we have here?
Well, I want to throw this out there, right? We all have hobbies. So it just depends. If you're doing this strictly as a business, or, or for some other means, hey, you might have different priorities. But when some of us who are doing this completely as hobbies, I remember the hobbies that I had when I was younger, right? And how much money I spent on paintball weekends, of buying cases of paint, and the gases, and the accessories for the
Cost a lot.
the tools that we were using, exactly. And all that money was just lost into the ether, so to speak, because I'm not using that anymore. The paint was consumed. It's just like the expense of the hobby itself, and yet we sometimes are trying to struggle over pulling the trigger on something that you want, right? Just the same way like I wanted that new J&J barrel for my Spider clone that I had back in the day.
Gotcha.
And that same way, right? Like you would spend that little extra for what you want, I don't see it being bad for you doing it for your studio that you're getting a lot out of. It's like putting that little extra bit of flair on that suit back in 2000.
Man, that's great in saying that. Listen, Justin is hanging out with us, one of
Hey, what's up,
my
Justin?
favorite creators, and he's just glad to catch both of us. And Overkill is the
Yeah.
way, and you are so
Yeah,
right about
sometimes it
that.
is.
Overkill is the way. And then my man Rob is here hanging out. Said when buying a camera with interchangeable lenses, the important thing to remember is that it's a long-term investment. He still has Canon glass from 2010. That's cool. That's cool.
Yep. And I do
Um,
too. That's the funny thing. Like, even though I moved away from my Canonite days, right? Like when I was shooting Canon, uh, now I shoot Sony. I still have my 50 millimeter lens, which is just such an amazing
Come on,
lens.
man.
That
The
is like,
nifty 50. You can't let that one go, right?
but the thing is, I still adapt it to my Sony cameras. So,
Very
like, whenever I
smart.
want to get those nostalgic feels, I'm able to just pop it onto that camera, shoot it for a little bit, and enjoy the photos with that quality of image because of the lens. And that's something that most people don't understand, that optics are always more important than the camera body. So even though we're talking about this and your budget should also be for the lens that you want to get. So make sure that you're looking for that, just the same way when it comes to the color science that it has to do with these cameras. Because for example, we mentioned it, the Sigma 16 millimeter that I'm using here, I've used Sigma lenses from when I was shooting Canon. And when I was shooting Canon, I was very pleased with those results. And that's why I had the confidence to move over into Sony, knowing that I would be getting that same type of quality imagery with my new cameras.
That's it. That's it. So we have one just started with Ecamm using the Fuji X-T3, which is a great camera with a Sigma on it as well. Listen, this is the first one for Fuji. So, we talk so much about Canon, Sony's, that Lumix cameras out there. Like Panasonic has come a long way with their autofocus. I believe the latest one that they've come out um, with improvements to their autofocus is something to look at as well. And then the
Mhm.
Fuji lines, there's a XT4, and then they also have a 5 that's out. Those are some great cameras to be looking into if you just want to look at something different other than the Sony and the Canon as well.
Yeah, and we talked about it yesterday, I think, that I told
Hmm.
you. I have a Fuji camera. As a camera junkie, I use Sony for the majority of like my production and what I would charge for my clients. But then as a camera junkie, I also have an array of cameras that you might see traced around there. And that one right there in the middle of that shelf there is my Fuji X-T1, which
That's
I
cool.
still love till today. And I told you I take a lot of my own personal pictures of my son, because sometimes, even though I love photography and everything, to capture those moments, I don't want to be spending a lot of time in post production trying to fix them or the colors. So that camera, even though some people might not, you know, I'll let you in on a secret. I mostly shoot JPEGs with my Fuji camera
That's what they're known for,
because
right? Great JPEGs.
exactly, and that's what I have it for, and I enjoy it for that aspect. So going back to the car analogy, right? That's kind of like the weekend driver, right? Like the
Right.
older camera that you're saying, I'm not going to use it every once in a while, but when I do, you know what? I don't want to be shifting gears. I want to be in an automatic. You understand? Just cruising and enjoying, the Sunday drive instead of trying to think about all the extra bells and whistles.
So let's round up with this for people that, as you're looking for cameras, things that if you're setting them up in your Ecamm studio, things you don't have to worry about. Okay, so let me start with number one is battery. Oh, this camera doesn't have like long battery life. Who cares? a dummy battery connected. Like you want full power, you don't have to worry. You don't want to worry about your camera giving out. Okay, so make sure you get a dummy battery as an accessory to your setup so you can plug it in and never worry about it. Okay. And I want to give a couple, and then I'll let you give one, so I can let you think about it because I didn't tell you ahead of time we're going to be doing this. Interchangeable
Okay.
lenses is a big deal, but if you're in the studio and this is your main shot, guess what you're not going to do? You're not changing that main shot. So having, one camera, one lens, that's where I'm at right now, and I'm not looking at the interchangeable lenses as such a big deal. Okay, in my studio. Now, if I go to another studio and I get more space and I can kind of spread out a little bit, I'm gonna get another lens so I can push it back and maybe even get a wider shot or whatever. But for what I have right now, I got one camera, one lens, and that's it. Okay.
Mhm.
There was one more thing that I was
But let
thinking
me let
about.
me add to that, because
Yes,
the
sir.
thing about getting an interchangeable lens camera is not the fact that you're going to be changing it out for every show. It is the fact that it's able to grow with you, because now, like you mentioned, if or when you move into your next studio and you have that extra space, you don't have to get a new camera. All you have to do is get the correct lens to adjust the focal length.
Very
That's
good
the
point.
advantage.
Very good point. Very good point. I'll let you go again. If you could think of anything else that people normally talk about, even with photography with these cameras, that, if you're setting it up on a mount or you're in your studio, you're not moving this camera, there's a couple of things you don't have to worry about. I got one. Record time. Okay.
Yeah,
Recording
that's
time. Like, okay, Sony doesn't have a recording time. Canon has a recording time of that 30 minutes. Guess what? You have to worry about that when you're connected to Ecamm, right? You got
that's
you
a
got the
great point.
yeah, you got it coming out to a capture card, going into your Mac, and it is gonna go as long as you want it to.
But another thing that you don't have to worry about is memory cards,
Memory cards.
because like my camera here, the one off to my side and everything, do not need to record the media directly. My Mac computer is taking care of that with Ecamm. So as long as they're connected and I have them connected, as soon as I hit broadcast or record, I'm recording all of the cameras simultaneously at the same time, allowing me to complete all of the post production work, and I don't have to deal with synchronizing multiple memory cards from multiple cameras. All of the files are in a simple folder, and as soon as I bring them onto my timeline, they're all of equal length, because the production that's doing the recording recorded all of them individually, but at the same exact time when I said start and when I said stop. Makes it so much
So it's
easier.
all in sync, and we're using Ecamm to do that. I mean, there's so many features and functions that Ecamm allows you to have in your network, in the process to record that. It takes away some of the things that people are used for features for certain phones. You don't have to work. I said phones, cameras. You don't have to worry about those things because you're connected to Ecamm. So there you go. Let's
I
let's end with. I'm
I
sorry, you're
can't
gonna say
even tell
something
you,
else.
I've created through Ecamm, just through my setup here. I think over 2 terabytes of data as far as content in the first 5 months of this year.
Wow.
Imagine if I was dealing with 2 terabytes plus of information that I would have to transferred from memory cards at 120 gigs a pop.
Right. That's
Like
a lot of time.
all the back and forth, and like file management and all that stuff, all that time that it has saved me, just that alone is like,
Yeah. Yeah. Time, effort, energy, a whole nine. And Rob is saying here, same in our conversation, was all in on Canon, but jumped to Red and now have the Sony FX3 and FX9. I think Sony lenses are great to have the best autofocus. Thank you for nerding out tonight. And Louise, we really have nerded out a little bit. I think this is a conversation that a lot of people want to have like day one. And You're not ready day one to have this conversation because you need to be at a place to where you are making content and trying to pick out, a 500, 700, $3,000 camera is definitely could be an obstacle that could stop you from creating content. Use whatever camera you have to get started, and as you are making content and you're ready to upgrade, this conversation in this video will give you a guide to things that you need to be thinking about before you get that next camera. And I could not have done it tonight without my good friend, Mr. Camera Junkie. Thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. If people want to know more about you and how they can connect with you, can you give us that information?
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you first for having me as well. It's always a blast to spend the time here with you on the live stream show and, just converse and, kick it. But if you want to find me, you can find me at Mr. Camera Junkie. You can just Google it or find me right here on YouTube. Every week, I have my weekly live stream, which happens every Saturday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, where I nerd out about cameras with the Camera Junkie crew. And this conversation happens for me weekly. So if you're into this and want more information just like this, be sure to visit me on the Camera Junkie live stream every Saturday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on YouTube.
I absolutely love it. Like, we went way over on time, but when you're having a good conversation, time just flies. So, guys, if you don't do anything, please do us a favor. Share this with people that may be looking for phones as well, because this is a great guide for you. That being said,
Cameras.
I'm still saying phones. Like, why phones on my mind? Camera. So that's another sign that I need to end the show. So, Aubrey, thank you as well for hanging out with us tonight. Hey, guys, same thing next Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to talk about some new tech in our industry, and I have a wonderful guest who's going to be coming to hang out with us as well. So don't miss the stream show next Sunday, right here on Ecamm Live's YouTube channel. I can't wait to see you again. All right. Thank you, guys.